everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Dan Straka, co-founder of OpForged.
I'm Scott Watrous, co-founder of OpForged and chief designer.
Wanted to do a quick overview and a little bit of history about the PBK. Thank you so much for all the comments, emails, and likes and everything since we released the video. It's been super cool reconnecting with everyone. I know we went dark for quite a while. There's good reason for it, but happy to talk about a little bit more where we started, where we're going, and kind of take it from there. So a lot of people are like, hey, what the heck, 5-6 years? Well, there's been some twists and turns along the way as we kind of developed a really neat product. So I'm going to grab the old PBK, and this is what we started out with, and many of you have seen this many years ago. And so I think it was like around 2017. I just gotten back into MagFed. I used to play scenario ball quite a bit. I've been playing since the 90s, but I got a little bit burned out. And then Magazine Fed was just so cool. The folks in New England here were just so cool. It felt like paintball for me in the 90s. So then what kind of happened was I was shooting real AKs with some buddies, and I'm like, wow, this is such a cool experience. Like, it just feels kind of different than shooting like an M4, and I'm like, why can't I play like this with paintball, right?
Yeah.
There's something about an AK that's just a little bit different. But one of the things that kind of bothered me at the time was a lot of paintball AKs were really just that. They were a paintball gun with AK furniture kind of stuck on, right? Like, you know, like a stack 2 blowback, right? It's got like the barrel was up kind of high.
Yeah.
That they stuff some like AK furniture around, which, you know, if that works for you, that's cool. But for me, I was just like, you know, I really just, it kind of bothers me that the barrel's like higher than the, you know,
yeah, they had hoppers.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah. It just
Yeah.
didn't like make as much sense. So I did what a lot of people have done. I bought like an Ion. I bought like an airsoft AK. Mm-hmm. I've been in manufacturing for about 20 years, so I had some access to some printers at the time. And I started trying to design stuff in CAD. And I was using someone else's magazines to try and get that rock and cock. I had to modify them. And then after a while, I was like, hey, Scott, what do you think about this? It's pretty kludgy, but what could I do better?
Yeah, and that's where I kind of entered the scene, having worked on MagFed stuff. I'd always wanted an AK paintball gun for like a decade. And, you know, I had talked to a bunch of people about it. People that like ran some of these MagFed companies, and I was like, yo, like, I can do the work. Like, we should make an AK. And everyone's like, no, it's too hard. It won't be right. I saw what Dan was doing, and it wasn't quite to this level, but it wasn't that far off. But it was basically, you know, an airsoft gun with an ion in it. And I was like, well, you know, there's some things we can do to improve a few details, but, you know, we might have a kit or something that we could build that, you know, then we could have a couple of them. And I think people would think that was pretty cool. And so that's where I kind of improved some of the systems and, you know, the trigger, and got it to where you could have like a moving charging handle, and cleaned up some of the details so you could actually pull the dust cover off and things like that.
Yeah, and it was quite a journey. Like, so, like 0 Hour became like our annual, like, this is where we are kind of milestone.
Yeah.
And the first one, like, we were up, you know, in this hotel, and we were like, you know, running the water, flushing the toilet in the middle of the night while we're dremeling and hammering, trying to get it done.
Yeah, we're like deburring magazines, like, you know, one at a time, and just trying to get the like hoses to fit, and like cramping our fingers and
yeah,
stuff.
not piss air everywhere, but it worked. That was a cool thing. It worked, and it was actually pretty fun to play. It played great. People got really excited about it. So like, all right, maybe rather than just like a fun side project, maybe there was like a little business here. So the idea we kind of cooked up at the time is like, why don't we figure out how to make kits? And I think, you know, Scott, you can talk a lot better about it than I can, but as we kind of realized, like, we're going to make kits, you know, I've been in the 3D printing manufacturing business for like 20 years.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh yeah, we have all this like kind of like access to stuff and this knowledge. But as we like, you know, incrementally improve the design, like the airsoft body didn't make any more sense. Like, there's a bunch of kludgy stuff that just started like shedding weight.
What we got for a kit was really quite nice. I mean, to be honest, like, it was really cool. But it wasn't field ready. And playing the games, like, it looked good, it felt good, it's light. But what we realized after using it was, even though we have like a really nice system, and, you know, hoses were kind of routed and everything real well.
You can show. Like it was a pretty neat.
We put a lot of energy into making it really nice. We even had, it would blow back sometimes from the exhaust air from the GOG Enemy.
Yeah.
The challenge is field survivability and field maintenance and like cleaning. To get this barrel out, I need wrenches. It's going to take me 10 minutes to do that. So it kind of had some limitations there, and there was just no getting around that. And we were using ultimately not our own core.
Yep.
So we kind of ran into some roadblocks as to where to go next.
Yeah, and I think that was like a really good point. Like scalability became an issue. So we were modifying other people's mags to fit that AK to get that kind of rock in motion. And again, it was another 0-hour game, and I bought like 20 or 30 mags. And I'm sitting there whittling them to get them into spec and everything, and I ruined like a third of them. And I'm like, Scott, like no one's gonna want to do this. Like I don't want to do it. So, and I came up with the stupid idea. So Scott's like, well, I've designed mags before.
A few. My kind of big claim to fame was the Zeta mag at the time. People knew me from the Zeta mag, and I had done other work on other magazines. And so I was like, we can do the AK mag justice. We can do it right.
Yep.
And I have the kind of background and experience to do it correctly. And so we just that was the first major leap, I think, from just kind of using other people's stuff with our own printed parts. Like, hey, we're actually making a functional core part of the gun.
Yeah, and I feel like that was like one of those kind of paradigm shifts. Like now that we had our own mags, we wanted more control, and then we had to, bend our own sheet metal. We had to like get away from the airsoft and start trying to maybe use some real parts. And then, I think a couple more years later, and a lot of you were at this game at 0 Hour, we brought like 5 guns. We were pretty excited, maybe to start selling kits. Yeah. People liked them, right? We got some pretty good feedback.
Yeah, we came and had, I think it was 4 or 5 rifles and a sniper version, and they were all functioning. I think 2 or 3 hit the field. We had people try it out. And everyone loved it. Everyone was like just all weekend, just like, we want this. This is really cool. And we were stoked. The challenge was scaling. And like knowing that, okay, it shoots good, it performs fine. It's it's a functioning gun. We didn't change that. But there are drawbacks to this setup. One of them being cleaning it, doing any kind of maintenance, taking the barrel out. This is held in with screws and clamps. Like, you got some work to do. If there's
not very practical,
Yeah. And then you were talking about the prints.
Yeah, so for me personally, like I've been in manufacturing for 20 years. I have access to some pretty big industrial 3D printers. And at that game, at the very end, I put one of the guns down and it just broke. Like the trunnion snapped, and I was just like, no one's going to want to like deal with that, right? So I'm like, 3D printing is cool. It has its place. No shame to people that 3D print their own stuff or buy 3D prints for paintball, but for like, it just didn't seem genuine, like to an AK. Like an AK has to be durable to be an AK.
That's true. I mean, for the level that we already had into this, for it to have those weak points was kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
And so we're like, we're this far along. We've got our own mags. This is all proprietary design. We're using a lot of real parts.
Yeah.
Like the safety selectors and the dust covers and stuff like that, to where it was like, well, how many further steps to just make it our own?
Yeah, which is a very critical moment to say like, hey, because after that game we were driving back, I'm like, hey Scott, I know we just spent like 3 years getting to this point, and I don't think it's for naught, but I don't think this is like a good, like my gut tells me like, with your design knowledge and your passion, like, do we just take a logical jump and say like, if we're going to make a real AK, why don't we make a real AK?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I had for a long time thought like paintball can be more realistic. There's no reason you can't have a 1-to-1 paintball gun.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of proof, and there was other guns out there, but this showed that like you can do the AK, right? Like the AK can look correct, use a lot of the right parts. We just need to finish the job because we were almost there.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. Like, let's go.
And that's where we are today. So it took another, 3 years, but we got to this stage, right?
Yeah.
I'll let you talk about it. It's like your baby and your design.
So this is the PBK 68 as it kind of exists today, which is our complete own design, patented valve, everything. And whereas this looks like an AK, this feels like an AK. It sounds like an AK. And it has all the features you want out of an AK. And so this was kind of the brainchild. This was the culmination of a lot of long design sessions and thinking about how it should all go together. You know.
Yeah, and you did that super fast. But that's the paintball gun. Like, that carrier is very similar to a real AK carrier, right?
Yeah. So this is the heart of the gun. This basically is the gun, the valve, everything. This kind of just holds it and aims the rounds where you want to go.
Yeah.
So
that's the cycling action where before it just looked real. But
right.
This cycling action actually is working as a hammer, striking a valve, and it's causing a recoiling action just like a real AK. So this is like integral to the function. That's why you actually get a little bit of recoil.
Yeah, and I mean, credit where it's due. There's inspiration from what Airsoft did with what they call the GBBs, you know, and GBBRs. And, you know, I was like, well, Airsoft has that. Why doesn't paintball have that? And we're dealing with different projectiles, different pressures, different energy levels. So you have to use a different system to launch the ball. And so that's what we came up with.
And what I like about it, too, is, and this was probably the last year, besides, like, it took a while to get the patent going and everything once we got to that. But the last year or two has really been focused on not only, you know, mastering the art of the manufacture of this, because there's a lot of techniques from investment casting. We bought some capital equipment to be able to build our own parts. It's almost all done in-house. We have we buy parts from real AK companies, but we're making a lot of our own. But you know, the last year was really about, I think, getting some paintball practicality back into the gun.
Yeah, so I think it was 2 years ago we had sort of the first-ish version of this at 0 Hour, or maybe it was last year. And we had it there, and it kind of showed the promise, but we had some teething issues where it's like, well, it functions, but we're having some issues with, you know, actually playing with it. Similar to what we had before, I was like, well, the barrel's a little tough to get out, so to clean it, do some work. So for an example of that, you know, it used to be that the barrel was pinned in place and you'd have to take this stuff off and unthread it. That was the same issue we had with the original PBK.
Yep.
And that's where I was fooling around with it at one of the games. I was like, well, this pin just kind of comes out and then the barrel kind of comes out. And I'm like, well, that's kind of handy. So I was like, well, how do I make it to where this pin doesn't just fall out? And so we added a detent. And so now you can swap your barrel out, you can clean it, you can do whatever you want, and you know, you're back in the field. And so for field strippability, I don't know of many paintball guns on the market where you can have the whole thing basically apart and ready to clean, or to swap your barrel for a different configuration. Like, you know, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and that's like, you know, there's a lot that Scott covered there. Like, there's the ease of use, like you can clean a barrel like in game without fear of like a bunch of parts flying out, you know. And also if you have like a different setup, like you just want a different barrel because you're gonna run shorty, like 0 Hour, like really tight, you know, tight spaces. And so that's kind of the way we've, you know, approached this too. That basically there's the PBK, but the PBK is really just this receiver section.
Right.
And then we have what we're going to call pre-populated barrel kits. So different barrel lengths, different styles. This one is particularly an AKM style where it's got the slanted gas brake. It's got the slant barrel brake. So, you know, really neat. And that's just a little bit different than changing out furniture. But some of the other kind of really cool features are that, you know, how many, you know, mag-fed guns have a regulator?
Not too many.
Yeah.
It's a pretty niche feature nowadays.
Yeah, but for us, like, you know, there are some, you know, precision going into this, but, you know, to get as much air and consistency as you can, we have the regular bit into the grip. One of the questions is, hey, why are you using remote lines? Well, one, we want to be pretty realistic.
Yeah.
2, we are going to come out with a bottle back option, but we did build in terms of paintball practicality, there is a 360-degree swivel. So I like the remote tanks because I like having like my realistic stocks, but this swivels with me as I'm moving, so I don't even notice that cord.
Right.
And then we also have one of the last designs that we implemented was anti-double feed.
Yeah, so from last year's 0 hour, we were kind of showing this off and playing with it. And kind of like the last major note that I had from like, a whole weekend of playing was like, well, when I go to check the chamber, which you can do, sometimes I'll load a second round. And, with regular round ball, that's fine. It's not a game breaker. But when you're shooting FSR and the rounds cost a lot and chopping them kind of sucks, you don't want to feed a bunch of rounds into the chamber at the same time. And being a closed bolt gun, you kind of want to make sure that you're not double feeding. So I came up with a double feed block so that if there is a round chambered, you can pull your bolt back all you want and it won't
advance another round.
Right, the round stays in the magazine. So that's pretty cool. And I think that kind of really was the last major design detail that elevates it from like, yeah, it shoots good and it looks good to like, oh, this is actually like a really sick mag-fed gun. Like,
yeah.
And it has features that no one else really had.
And that's been like our focus, like make it a very realistic experience, like, cycling action, reloading action, weight, right?
Yeah.
It weighs almost just like a real AK, but like if it doesn't shoot well,
no,
and if the mags jam all the time and FSRs flip, then it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. It's like, well, you don't want to spend, big money on a wall ornament. You kind of want it to actually be something you can play with. Otherwise, just go buy an airsoft gun.
yeah, you might as well. And that's one of the things we wanted, because people said, hey, what's the price? And we're going to talk about in a little bit later what the release waves look like. But in this one, there's a lot going on. It's a little bit different. There's a lot of custom. We're not a giant company. It's me and Scott and some other hands helping us, but it's so we're going to be releasing them in waves and offering some benefits to early adopters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hey everyone, thanks for listening to our spiel about the history of the PBK and checking out some of the overview features. We're going to be releasing some more intimate tech videos, just showing you the details we put into the gun, like a little bit more how it works. But like and subscribe. Check us out on Facebook. We'll be releasing more content pretty soon.